Welcome back. I'm Anastasia, and my mission is to build a community of acceptance and authenticity. I needed some adventure buddies for this journey of insight, and I'm glad it's you. You are all welcome here, and I'm grateful you decided to join me. After my last episode, when Stephanie asked me what I recommend or teach around boundaries, I knew I had to do an episode where I take the few minutes that I talked about it and flesh it out. So if you struggle with boundaries, setting them, understanding them, or respecting them, you are in the right place. It is an uncomfortable space to try to sit in. So while this episode is educational and intellectual, I also want to recognize that boundaries are emotional and so hard to enforce with the people that you love. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to thank my brand partner, Occupied Mind. Occupied Mind's goal is to create a sanctuary of self-expression through their clothing designs. Their belief is that everyone deserves to feel at home in their own skin. We share that dream, which is why I support them, and my closet is slowly turning into an Occupied Mind showroom. Use code InsightsWithUs15 at checkout to find a shirt that speaks your mind and bears your soul. That's OCTOPIEDMIND.com. Use code InsightsWithUs15 at checkout for 15% off. Be authentically you. My favorite quote, which Stephanie and I talked about in the previous episode of Insights with Us, is, "Boundaries are the distance with which I can love you and myself at the same time." If we give too much and don't set boundaries, the other person might feel loved, but we might feel depleted over time and eventually burn out. The goal is to find an equilibrium, a push and pull, where you both give to the relationship, but not so much that you get overwhelmed. Boundaries are the limits that we put on our own capacity to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves too. There are 3 very oversimplified steps when it comes to setting boundaries. 1, you have to know what your boundary is. 2, you have to be able to tell other people that your boundary exists. And 3, you need to be able to enforce the boundary that you are setting. If it is not enforceable, it is either too big or it's not a boundary, but an expectation, and you are trying to control something that is not yours to control. So let's start with this third idea. It needs to be enforceable. I have noticed that more recently, people love to throw the word boundaries around like it's a catch-all of, well, if I say this is my boundary, then you have to do what I want. But that's not what boundaries are. Boundaries are the lines that you draw for yourself, not necessarily what you draw for others. If you are trying to tell someone else how to show up or who to be, that's an expectation. It's not a boundary because you can't enforce it. And again, the biggest way to determine which is paying attention to what is within your control and what is within theirs. For example, if I had a roommate who was also my friend and they were inviting me out every other day to go do something fun, an expectation masked as a boundary would be, I don't like how we're going out all the time. You need to stay home with me more so that I'm happy. You going out all the time is crossing my boundary. My actual boundary would be, I don't want to go out multiple times a week. I appreciate you, but I can't keep doing this. You can do whatever you want to do, but I'm going to stay home more. I can actually enforce them. Now, my roommate, if they were to cross my boundary, would be, well, I don't care if you want to stay home. I want you to come out with me, so let's go. And they push until I cave and finally say yes. So in this example, I have zero control over whether or not my hypothetical roommate wants to go out, even if I have a preference of what our friendship would look like. I only have control over whether or not I join them, and they have no control over whether or not I join them. If I stay home more often and say no to their invites, maybe they'll shift and start hanging out at home with me more, or maybe our friendship is going to grow and change and we no longer do everything together. Both options are okay, as long as I am staying true to myself and not crossing my boundaries by going out with them all of the time. Again, I want to repeat this. A boundary is something that you can actually enforce. If it is not enforceable, then it is not a boundary. It is likely an expectation that you are putting on someone else. Another tricky step with boundaries is even if it is enforceable by you, that doesn't necessarily mean you are ready to enforce it. If someone is used to crossing your boundaries, or you never told them a boundary was there and then suddenly you're trying to enforce it, you might struggle to do this successfully. That doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It just means you're doing something new. And we'll talk more about this in a minute, but my best recommendation is to start smaller with something that is easier to enforce and build from there. So now let's talk about how boundaries and lack thereof can show up in our lives. There are different intensities of boundaries, and I like to think of it as a spectrum: porous, healthy, and rigid. On one end of the spectrum are porous boundaries, meaning almost no boundaries at all. I like to picture this as a meadow filled with wildflowers. There are no walls, no fences, no specific paths for people to follow, and anyone who enters the meadow can come and go as they please. There's nothing to stop them. They can pick the flowers, they could trample them if they wanted to, they could lay a blanket down and not care where. There are no guidelines for how to show up in this meadow. You might have porous boundaries, that meadow, if you have trouble saying no, tend to take on others' problems as your own, let others treat you however they want to, even if it's abusive or disrespectful, or you do whatever anyone asks because you're afraid of rejection or abandonment, and you tend to overshare details about your personal life. On the other end of the spectrum, we have rigid boundaries. I imagine instead of a meadow, we have a fortress. There's a moat, the drawbridge is up, there are bars on the windows, guns on top of the turrets. Even if someone has all the right paperwork, they might not be allowed in. If the drawbridge opens, it's only for a split second, and then everybody who is let in is kicked back out. You might have rigid boundaries if you avoid intimacy, hate asking for help, or are hyper independent, don't have a lot of close relationships, almost never share personal information. You hear people say that you're detached, and you may also fear rejection, but you protect yourself by pushing others away before they can push you away. And finally, we have the middle of the spectrum: healthy boundaries. Imagine healthy boundaries as a mix of the two images. The meadow is there, but there are fences guarding the sensitive areas. The fortress is there, but the moat and guns are gone. Maybe the drawbridge is down sometimes, depending on who you're with. And certain people can come and go, but others, they're going to be stopped at the gate. And if they're not trusted yet, they might not ever be let in, but maybe over time they can earn that trust, and you'll slowly show them the deeper parts of you. Maybe not, but we'll see. You might have healthy boundaries if you can value your opinion, even as you take others' opinions into account. You share personal information when it's relevant or with someone that you trust, but not all of the time with anyone. You can say no when you need to, but say yes when you're able. And you can communicate your wants and needs, but can also accept when others say no to you. The thing about boundaries is you can have a mix of all three of these. There are several different types of boundaries, categories of boundaries. And as we go through these different areas, you might be surprised to learn that in some areas you're more rigid, some areas you're more porous, and some you might already have healthy boundaries. It also changes depending on the person you're thinking about. So, for example, I have looser boundaries with my partner and my best friend, but more rigid boundaries with people who are just an acquaintance or a random person that I meet at the park. The goal is flexibility, allowing yourself to pick and choose based on the context. So let's talk about the different types of boundaries. The first few that I'm going to discuss are a little bit less vulnerable, depending on who you are. So I'm going to start there, and then we're going to get into some more complex and layered boundaries. I want you to be curious about how you react to these and what you think about them. The first two are physical and material boundaries. Physical boundaries are related to your personal bubble and what kind of platonic touch you are okay with. The COVID-19 pandemic was a great example of physical boundaries because it was recommended that we stay 6 feet apart. Some people didn't care at all, and some people would rather stay 10 or even 20 feet apart. Everyone has a different boundary here. So, for example, do you like hugging? Are there certain people you're okay hugging while others you'd rather not? If you're in a relationship, do you go to the bathroom with the door open? Do you shower together? Is there a lot of privacy that you're needed in the bathroom? In my last episode, I talk about how our master bathroom in our current place doesn't have a door. And some of my friends are completely freaked out by it, even though it doesn't bother me or my partner. Physical boundaries get crossed when someone enters your physical space or your private room without your permission. Material boundaries relate to money and possessions. How do you feel about sharing, borrowing, lending your stuff? If your family member asks to borrow a tool from your garage, you might say yes, but you're less likely to say yes if it's a stranger off the street. I have 3 siblings, so I was not the best at sharing, especially when it comes to food. Well, at first. If I shared my food right away, I sometimes wouldn't get any of it. So I would have a really strong boundary at the start, would take the chance to enjoy whatever I bought myself, and then I would open it up to sharing after I had my fill. And then I don't care. You can share. You can have whatever you want. And it can confuse people sometimes because unless they know that that's my boundary, basically, if it's mine, let me go first, people will assume that I have no problem sharing and just cross my boundary because they're like, well, you've shared with me before, so I'm just gonna do it. But they will use it before I've had a chance to, or take a bite before I've had the first one. And this includes new games I've gotten, if I buy myself a snack or a drink, or even if I buy a piece of clothing with the intention of sharing it with my partner. If I bought it, let me have the first use or the first bite, and then you're welcome to join me after. Your material boundaries get crossed when people take or use your belongings without asking, or even breaking your belongings without taking accountability. Intellectual boundaries are what we talk about and with who. Some friends you might be able to talk about anything with and not feel stressed at all, while others you might feel nervous or on edge during certain talks or worry about saying things the wrong way. A more charged example of this are topics like politics and religion. There are some people in our lives where you can have a difference of opinion and you can still feel heard and respected, while others might argue with you in a way that makes you feel belittled or hurt. Setting an intellectual boundary is having certain topics that are off limits with people. And this boundary gets crossed if people continue to talk about that subject or don't try to understand your position and just put you down for not agreeing with them. Sexual boundaries are knowing what you like and what you don't like and who you do it with. These boundaries are crossed when you are touched without your consent or pushed to do things that you are uncomfortable with. Now, I'm based in Colorado, so consent might look a little different wherever you are legally. But in Colorado, legally, you need 3 things to give consent. First, you have to want it. You want to say yes. Second, you cannot be intoxicated. Again, legally, if you are under the influence of any drug, it is not considered consent. And third, you have to be able to say no. If you say no and the other person keeps pushing until you finally say yes, it's coercion. It's not consent. And I am happy to talk about this in more detail in the future if you want. I'm extremely passionate about sexual health and boundaries and consent. But we are focused on boundaries as a whole today, not sexual health and communication. So we can save it for another time if any of you are curious. So next, I'm going to discuss emotional boundaries. This one has a lot of gray areas because many people struggle to sit with their own emotions. So they don't even know if an emotional boundary is getting crossed. Explained simply, emotional boundaries are knowing when to share, who to share with, and how much to share about your personal life and experiences. These boundaries get crossed when someone invalidates your experience, doesn't care to listen, puts you down for your feelings, or ignores your experience and expects you to hold their feelings for them. Another way these boundaries can get crossed for yourself or others is trauma dumping. Sharing everything all at once before you have built trust around vulnerability with someone. It's important to name that often vulnerability comes before trust, but it starts with baby vulnerabilities and then curiosity for how the other person reacts before you go deeper. And then the deeper you go, if the other person can continue to hold space for you and meet you there, the more trust you are going to have. And if at any point you hit a level of depth and the other person can't show up for you, that means you've hit their emotional boundary and it's your turn to respect them. It can feel painful to do so though, especially when you want others to show up with you and meet you where you're at and they're unable to do so. Maybe because they can't handle that level of vulnerability or emotional discomfort, or maybe it's because they are so focused on their own perspective and experience that they're unable to pause and think about it from your perspective. But no matter the reason, they've hit their limit. And so it's time to respect their emotional boundary and decide where yours is with them. For example, let's say I have a friend that I have a lot of fun with, and then suddenly our relationship starts getting a little bit deeper and a little bit more vulnerable. My brain might go, oh my God, you're about to be in my inner circle of friendship. Let's get deep. But then I hit a point where I share and they're unable to meet me. I need to accept that. But I also get to decide if I want to stay in that deeper place with them where that line was, or if I want to pull back and set some boundaries. Because I can keep it at the fun level of friendship and stop trying to go deeper. I get to decide too. Boundaries are constantly shifting and changing, and everyone has their own limits that won't necessarily match yours. So how do you enforce and respect your own while also hearing and respecting theirs? It's not easy because we all have different lines. And we're going to get into this more in just a minute. I have one more category of boundary to talk about, and that is time. This is the one that resonates with people the most about what is so challenging about it, because it is constantly fluctuating and often needs the most care, but it is also often the hardest to enforce. Time boundaries are how much time you give to each category of your life. You need time for work, self-care, relationships, hobbies, adventure, and any other category of your life that you've decided is important. Pet care is a part of my time balance, but may not be a part of everyone's list. Time boundaries are crossed when someone expects more time from you than you are able to give. What makes this challenging is, as life changes, how we allot our time also needs to change. But if someone in your life is used to taking up your time in a very specific way, and you're suddenly saying no, it is common that they blame you for this, get upset, call you selfish, say that you don't care anymore, when really it's just that life is changing and so are your boundaries. This is so common. Most people I've spoken to about boundaries have at least one example of a relationship where this changed and the other person struggled to adapt. And for that other person, it can be really hard to accept that change. Because even though it doesn't mean that that person doesn't care about you, it could still hurt and it could still feel lonely. And that can be really challenging. So let me give you an example. When my partner and I first started dating, we had a 30-minute commute to see each other. We were in that amazing honeymoon phase and wanted to see each other all of the time, but that commute made it difficult. And my partner set a rigid boundary right at the start of our relationship. He said, I want to see you, but I can't stay the night at your place on weeknights. It would make my morning commute too challenging and I can't handle it. Okay, that's fair. I can respect that. And at the time, I had a really flexible schedule and didn't mind the commute on most days. So I told him I would just stay at his place. I met him where he was at. and it worked out great. We had a blast for the first year or so. And then I started to get burned out. It started to feel like a chore. And I work from home, so I was commuting home to work, which was really starting to wear on me. My needs and my boundaries changed, and I told him so. I said, I understand and accept that you can't stay at my place, but I don't think I can keep staying at yours on weeknights. I'm exhausted, and this is not sustainable. He said he understood, and with my boundary in place, we shifted into a new dynamic in our relationship. Now, before I share what happened next, I want to take a moment to intentionally name what happened. Instead of meeting in the middle from the beginning and then trying to figure out where to be with our boundaries, he had a very strict boundary that I respected, but also said, no problem. I can just come over to you and meet you where you're at. This is the ideal scenario for him because I basically said I didn't have a boundary and I would just do whatever he wanted. When my needs changed and I suddenly had a boundary, we still weren't meeting in the middle. Instead, I went back over to my side and he stayed on his side. In the video, I'm showing this physically. Basically, there is a huge gap between our boundaries. When someone sets a boundary with you, it is not your job to meet them exactly there. You just can't cross it. So if they set a boundary, you can say, okay, that's fine, but if that is your boundary, here is mine. And if there is a gap between your boundaries, that is okay. But in this example, my partner was used to having no gap between our boundaries because I didn't have one. And me always meeting him on his side of the boundary line and then suddenly saying, hey, actually, I need to be over here. And there was this big gap and I was refusing to bridge it. That led to some confusion, some hurt, and some loneliness. Not him explicitly being mean to me or blaming me for it, but I was no longer giving him exactly what he wanted in the way he was used to getting it. And yes, I wanted it too, but as I said, it wasn't sustainable. So something had to change. And even though he understood and respected my boundary, and we explicitly talked about it, for the next 6 months or so, he would regularly make comments like, I just never see you anymore. And why don't we hang out as much? And I just really miss you. We used to do so much more together. Unintentionally, because I'm awesome and he wanted more time with me, he was basically saying, I don't like this gap between our boundaries. Can you come back over to my side? Because he wasn't going to cross his boundary, so he was trying to ask me to cross mine. But I wasn't going to cross my boundary now that I had one and it was in place. So every time I would name it, I'd say, I get it, but I can't stay at your place on weeknights anymore. If you miss me that much, you are welcome to stay with me. And then he would reiterate his boundary and how important it was to him and how he couldn't possibly do that. To which I would agree with him, reiterate my boundary and emphasize how important it was to me. So neither of us were going to cross our boundaries and we needed to respect each other's boundaries. So this is just how it is then. And we're going to have to accept that we're not going to see each other as often. Our capacities are constantly changing. That doesn't mean you've done something wrong or that you are selfish. It just means that something is different. And there is likely a boundary that needs to be enforced that didn't used to be there. Now, as I said, sometimes, even if a boundary is technically enforceable, if you struggle to enforce it, that could be a sign that your boundary is too big. So, for example, I'm trying to think of one. Let's say that roommate example where my roommate was trying to get me to go out every other day. And I am a huge homebody. That would not have worked for me. And so if I tried to just say no off the bat and just never give in, I'm like, nope, I'm never going out ever again. That might work. But sometimes, and often, more often than not, because you're so used to giving in to that invite and push, then you might end up caving on that boundary. You might struggle to enforce that. And you might go out still a lot more than you're ready for. So what that might mean is that boundary is too big. You want to be able to enforce it, but maybe you're just not there yet. So maybe instead of trying to say no to going out at all right off the bat, Maybe you try to say no once a week. See how that feels. Get them used to you sometimes saying no. Maybe you do that, and then when you are out, you put a cap on how often or how long you stay out. Maybe they're used to you going out the rest of the night until they're ready to go home. Maybe you only stay out for an hour or two and then you find your own way home. You can shift what the dynamic looks like without immediately just saying no to everything right away. And then as they get used to those boundaries, well, then maybe you start saying, hey, actually, now that I'm staying home more, I'm realizing how important this is to me. And I don't know if I can go out as often. You can keep doing whatever you want. I respect that, but I need you to respect that I'm going to start saying no. There's levels to this. You can learn to trust yourself with your boundary setting. And if it feels too hard, make it smaller. Think of boundaries like a pendulum swing. If you've never had any boundaries, they're incredibly porous, like that meadow, and then you realize that you'd rather have boundaries and protect yourself and your peace, the pendulum will often swing to the other extreme. Not always, but often. And that's those rigid boundaries, like that fortress. And a pendulum doesn't just find the middle and stop. It is constantly swinging back and forth between porous and rigid until it slowly finds that equilibrium in the middle. It's okay not to know your balance with your boundaries immediately. And it's okay if you fall back into old patterns as you learn to show up in that balanced way. It's that swing. The goal is flexibility and recognizing when you need to be strict with your boundaries and when you can let them bend. It's a constant experiment in life. And if someone gets angry or upset at you when you start saying no, remember that this can be a normal part of that process. If they are used to you always meeting them wherever they are at, and suddenly you set a boundary and step a few steps back, that's going to be confusing for them. They're going to react to it. All you can do is remind yourself and them that it doesn't mean you stopped caring. It just means that your capacity has changed. And you hope that they can hear you and accept it. And if they can, well, then it'll actually strengthen your relationship over time, not weaken it. And if they can't, then you get to decide what that means for you. If the relationship is worth continuing, or if their inability to respect your boundaries means it's time to walk away. I have walked away from a lot of people in my life who were unable to meet me or even talk about where we were at separately. And every single time it was awful. It was full of grief and sadness, and then eventually relief, because I wasn't having to constantly fight someone on where my line was and continually explain to them why I was upset that they kept crossing it. The people that stay in my life are the ones that accept me for me and where my boundaries are, and let me know where their boundaries are, because I need to be aware of that too and be able to respect them. It goes both ways. Some people, I'm lucky, I get to see them once a month or so. And some people, I only see them maybe once a year. But we're still solid friends because we have that foundation and we trust each other. And I'm not worried about those friendships at all because we know exactly who we are to each other and respect our capacities, even if I miss them sometimes. For those of you who are listening and supporting me, who are my once a year or less friends, I just want to shout out, I love you. Thank you for accepting me for me, and thank you for being in my life in the way that you are able to be in. Boundaries are the distance with which I can love you and myself at the same time. Hopefully something we talked about today resonated with you. If it did, let yourself sit with that idea for a little while longer. If you have any questions for this podcast or any themes you'd like us to focus on in the future, send us a message on Instagram at Insights With Us Podcast, or send us an email at insightswithus@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more, please follow, like, or subscribe. If you want to support the continuation of this podcast, you can donate. To do so, find me, Anastasia Soroka, on buymeacoffee.com. You can also find Insights With Us on Substack for exclusive content, including videos and other writings about my insight journey. You can find digital downloads on my website, happymindwellness.com. Thank you for being my adventure buddy. I appreciate you, and I appreciate you being here. Thank you for creating insight with us. I want to thank my other brand partners, the Pelvic People. Everybody's bodies are different, and how we connect bodies, I'm talking pleasure here, should not be painful. Whether you want to have fun with yourself or with another person, the Pelvic People are a group of healthcare providers creating products to help your body heal and find your own path to pleasure. You are not alone. And if you struggle to let go and find pleasure in your sex life, check out the Pelvic People. Use code INSIGHTSWITHUS7 for $7 off at checkout. That's THEPELVICPEOPLE.com. Use code INSIGHTSWITHUS7 for $7 off at checkout.